So, Jupiter really wanted me to ask you this question. Jupiter Peraza, everybody give her a round of applause. She is Director of Social Justice Initiatives at the Transgender District, and she also executive produced this whole event tonight. We get asked the same questions. Like, what does it mean to be trans? And, tell us your coming out story, or, what was it like for you to take hormones for the first time? And, we always get those questions. And so, now I have it down to a science. They'll pay me to come speak at the universities and stuff. And I'll show up and, yes, trans. Hormones, amazing, transitions, and whatnot. So we wanted to make sure that we were asking questions that I feel like you don't get asked enough publicly. And so, who's in those DMs?
Oh, Lord.
Just kidding.
Good.
No, but what is it like? Okay, so you lived in Oakland.
I did.
Via Atlanta. I know, I was there. We've had many experiences going out and navigating dating and what have you. And now you're a Georgia peach in the Big Apple and have been for a couple of years. What is it like to be dating as Raquel Willis, but also just as a Black trans woman? When I say as Raquel Willis, I mean as a trans person that is visible, because I think it changes everything when the trade knows that you're visible. It's harder for them to commit. I'm just gonna be transparent.
Right. No, I think that that's true. I think I've definitely had experiences where I felt like if I wasn't as visible, I could have more of a situation or a relationship with the trade in question.
A ball player, an athlete,
okay, right. But
a rapper.
But that's because I think sometimes they may be open to the idea of being with you if you don't acknowledge your transness. And that is a problem. And I think, I was like a lot of young trans people several years ago when I thought that I could do that. I could compromise that part of myself for romance and to come home to somebody. And I'm just at a point now where I don't want to do that, I think that there are a lot of people who want us to compromise who we are, to be with them. And then they want social cookies because they're like, oh, this isn't as much of a problem for me that you're trans than I thought it would be. And it's like, you don't get any cookies for that, boo. Like, you are who you are. My transness doesn't inform who you are. It's my experience. You don't get to own that and wield it like a cookie, And let's be clear, I think even interracially, that happens too, where it's like the non-Black person who dates the Black person is like, oh, I'm so woke. And they've learned to an extent not to like vocalize that, but you can feel when you're...
Some of them do.
No, but they do. No, some of them do voice that, but I just think that we have to be a bit more discerning about when people are trying to use our identity to say something about who they are versus just actually loving us.
So are you dating?
Am I dating? I am dating. But y'all not gonna see anybody on my gram. They don't get all of that until it's official. Taraji P. Henson actually said this on one of her interviews. She was like, you don't get to see all of that part of my life or be a part of all of that part of my life until you're committed. And I'm very, monogamous. So that's also a thing because now,
everybody's poly.
Everyone is poly. And it's like, I think there's legitimacy for a lot of folks who are poly. And I also think that there are a lot of toxic people who have wielded polyamory get their cake and eat it too. And,
we talked about this. Yeah. I have found in the dating space, and I talked to you about this too. Mm-hmm. I think cis men are just calling it another name. I think it's very different when a cis or trans woman or non-binary person is like, I'm poly, that's what I want, blah, 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 blah. But generally, at least on, I can't say the name, damn it. Anyways, on a dating app, mm-hmm. The messages that I have gotten is, you know, will you be my second or third even? Yes. And I'm always fascinated. First of all, they never have a trans woman as their first.
That's true.
In the cis men situation.
Disposable.
Have you ever noticed that?
Even in those formations, we're disposable. We're the accessory. We're the extra, mm-hmm. and not the essential part of the relationship or the partnership or whatever. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm also not trying to be your third and be your unicorn. You know, that's what they've always, you know, tried to make it sound cute. Right. And I think if that's what you want to do, great. I don't like the idea that like I'm the one who's on the chopping block if anything goes down.
Well, and I feel like as trans people in the dating space who may be monogamous, it often feels like you don't get to have the agency to decide that. Uh-huh. It's just the cards that you're handed from the dating pool. Yeah. Is, you know, you can be my second. Like, no one has ever messaged me and been like, I want you to be my primary partner. Nobody. Right. In the poly sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Scorpio, so poly doesn't really work for me. Sorry.
I'm a Gemini, so in theory it should work for me, but no. I'm a diva in a relationship. It is what it is.
I mean, this is why I'm a long time single woman is, you know, I still have my issues that I'm overcoming, you know. If he doesn't answer on the first ring, I'm like, Holy Spirit, activate. And I'm just kidding.
I can't.
JK. Fashion Week.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. Come on.
Okay.
You never get to talk about this stuff publicly. I mean, you do it, but, you know. You do New York Fashion Week. You just came back from Milan. Fashion Week. You did an activation with Prada.
Yes.
What is something I have to confess that I love about you that may be a little different than me is in the influencer realm, you only work with brands and designers and what have you if they have a commitment to social justice in the ways that you ask them to, which I love about you, because when brands reach out to me, I'm like, yay, free stuff. Let me take photos and tag them, and now I have a new wardrobe, and we talked about this, but, you know, I'm like, yay, okay, well, they'll get around to, you know, trans stuff later, you know, but.
It's like that for me sometimes, too.
Yeah.
You know, I think, I feel awkward talking about experiences in like the fashion space or like a luxury space because I have all of these issues with like capitalism and elitism, and I also am human, right? And I think the aesthetic piece to it of like things that are pretty, like that are art to me, because I think that that's how a lot of people connect with fashion. You know, it's like an aesthetic thing. It's beautiful. It's like art to me. Feels important. I think having conversations about representation, even in those spaces that are not always the most equitable, is important, right? And so if I have an opportunity to leave the door open a little bit more with a brand or a company I'm working with, or at least put on their radar that they should be thinking about gender in a less binary way. My Southern was coming out. Less binary way, and thinking about anti-Blackness, how they've been in bed with white supremacy, et cetera, then then I want to have that conversation. So I think it's complicated, right? And I know that I'm not going to always get it right. And I know there's probably going to come a time where, I'm going to be critiqued about a company that I've worked with or whatever. But I'm open to that because I know I'm not going to get it right. Even though I'm known as an activist and have this organizing background, I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. I don't know the ins and outs to explain all of my issues with capitalism or all of my issues with everything that is kind of happening behind the scenes with a lot of these companies. But I'm willing to learn. And, when possible, bring in, the person from community who can speak to that. So I also don't always take every opportunity. Sometimes I'm like, you need to talk to Aria about this, or you need to talk to Tony Michelle Williams or somebody else, or Dominique Morgan or whoever else. Yeah. But you want to know, what does it feel like?
So, I am unapologetic in my love of luxury. Everybody knows that. I feel like it's very accessible to people. And I think the reason why is it's sort of my own revolution. I mean, they don't make my size in clothes or shoes or, so I have to, I have had to comb the world to get access to those things. And I think, those things are just things. Those things are just material. They can represent moments in our lives. And, I have bags that just represent when I got my first apartment or, after being home, it's milestones, but those things don't really matter. But I also, at the same time, am fascinated by the recent shift because I just feel like it's ballroom evolved. Ballroom was created because we didn't have access to those spaces. Yeah. That's why the houses in ballrooms are House of Gucci or House of Mizrahi, House of Balenciaga, House of Dior, right? Those people never thought about us in any of those ways when they were designing or marketing. And then to see Raquel at the Prada show or Aya Simone at the Bottega show in Detroit or, Monroe Bergdorf, to see that and for them to even bring ballroom legends into those spaces, I just think it's the evolution of we finally get to have not only access to those spaces, but we're the most interesting and beautiful people there.
But it's true. But we've always been the most interesting and beautiful. Exactly. It's just that we were outside of the door, not inside of the room. Right. And so much of what's been considered cool for ever has been lifted from us. It's been lifted from quotes, street culture, from hip hop, from people in ballroom, so you're absolutely right. I mean, it is heartening to see folks in these spaces and to be one of the folks in those spaces. And I still struggle because, I also want to know, well, what does this mean in the long run in terms of the material conditions for the next Black trans woman who doesn't have this access? And I feel that. I feel that awkwardness in those spaces sometimes. So I think it's complicated, but you're absolutely right. One thing I'll say, and I'll kind of end it, is I think that we deserve to see ourselves as, the fantasy or the dream in our head. I mean, what is transness but that, right? Making the dream real. And I think it's beautiful that we're seeing more of our folks. And, I come from a Black Southern background, and I think about the ways my mom and our people would get dressed up on Sunday. And the ritual of it, right? Putting on the fascinator to go to church. I grew up in a Catholic church, so it was mostly white. And my mom would, even when she converted to Catholicism, when she married my dad, she still came to church the way she went to the AME church. Mm-hmm. she'd be the only one in a matching fascinator with like the outfit all the way down, the like, it's almost like a suit skirt kind of combo, like, like the mama of the church will wear in like Southern Black churches. She has her like baby blue fascinator on, her matching outfit, matching shoes, and that was her expression of who she was as a Black woman in the South, on soil where we were forced to cover our heads. We were told we weren't beautiful, that we weren't able to access the things that our white counterparts were. And I think that that's beautiful. So I think that historical preservation of beauty, particularly by Black folks, by Black women, is something that I carry around, and especially in those spaces too.
I love that. I also love that on the other side of that, I just want to add, as a Black woman, oh, yes, sorry, I was giving you very, like, deep and profound. But, as a Black woman who loves luxury, I definitely am blessed and privileged that when I wear it, people think it's fake anyway, so.
That's real.
When Black people are in luxury, they think it's fake. But Jupiter, that's a whole nother conversation. Look what y'all did to me, piano fight. I'm normally not this unfiltered. Normally I'm very much like,
what?
Hello, I'm Aria Sa'id. Great to meet
yeah,
you.
no.
Hi. So if anyone wants to be bold and courageous and join the conversation, please do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask Raquel more of like the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah, the ones she wrote down.
Well, thank you for this conversation. It's lovely to have you back in San Francisco. As someone who used to live in the Bay Area and now lives in New York, can you speak to some of the things that you have maybe seen as a part of the national narrative and the news reflected back about San Francisco, and how that may or may not be, if you see it as maybe a backlash to some of the social activism and social justice fights that have happened over the last few years?
Ooh. Wait, I need to repeat the question for the camera. Right? Is that what you told me to do? Have you seen the news about San Francisco? I think I know where Honey's going. The national conversations about what is going on in San Francisco and the social issues that we're facing. I remember when you called me because you're like, girl, what is your mayor doing on TV? Because she was like, this bullshit. Do y'all remember that? It went viral. Okay. So what is it like as someone who has the context of the Bay Area and knows many of the issues that we are facing and have faced due to gentrification, due to a change in our economy, right? So tech is the largest economy in San Francisco, and that a lot of the social issues that have been exacerbated have been a byproduct of that shift. And so watching the stories about our district attorney and the state of homelessness and state of emergency in the Tenderloin be a national conversation, the rate of crimes in San Francisco. Yeah. How is that for you as someone who has a connection to the Bay Area?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back and I guess talk about what it was like when I first moved here. So I moved here 6 months before Trump was elected. And I moved from Atlanta. And I didn't really know what to expect. I was excited to live somewhere else because I had been in Georgia my entire life. I had that whole kind of archetypical archetypal mentality around the South that's like, oh, I'm in this backwards place, it's so regressive, I've got to get out of here. Like that was my understanding. And I also obviously grew up very cognizant of my queerness and transness to an extent. So there was something in me that was always like, I gotta get out and I gotta get to a Mecca. And the queer Meccas were New York and San Francisco. I mean, you, especially as a young black person in the 90s and early 2000s, everything is set in New York. There were a lot more things set in San Francisco during that time too. I mean, I'm mostly thinking about like Full House and like, you know, what was it? That's So Raven, right? But they were there, right? I didn't really see narratives about Atlanta as a kid or Georgia as a kid. So it was about getting to these places. So when I moved here, I think what was shocking to me, because I also had all of these ideas about like, you know, the Black Panther lore, right? Like this, and there's this assumption that like all of the social justice movements that have been birthed and touched down in the Bay Area have created some kind of Black oasis. I think we assume that, right? Outside of the Bay Area context. But when I got here, I was so disheartened to, well, no, but I was disheartened because I felt like I came into an area that was in mourning. Especially, you know, the folks of color I knew and Black folks I knew and even queer and trans folks. So many folks were already gone and pushed out. So people were missing the folks who had been pushed out and displaced and fearful that they were going to be pushed out and displaced. I mean, I remember it felt more difficult to find a place to live when I first moved here than it was when I moved to New York. Yeah. And so I felt that immensely. But, you know, I think outside of California and outside of the Bay, people have this idea that it's like, you know, because politically it's so progressive. You know, I used to jokingly call it like one of the progressive pearls in the country, that they don't have to worry about the Bay Area anymore, you know? And I think that also happens too when people think about the long history of like queer and trans resistance and resilience here. They're like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about the queer and trans people there because they're in a queer and trans Mecca.
They got a district.
They got a district, and you know, and they've got all of these nonprofits. So there is that, and then I will say what was stoked during the Trump era was this animosity towards places like California, you know, the blue coastal places. And so I think that has even heightened some of the ire that people who don't have a connection to the Bay have about this area too, because they're like, oh, well, you know, you all think you're better than us anyway because y'all consistently, you know, vote blue. I mean, there's the assumption that like there are no Republicans and conservatives in California.
Most of California is actually conservative.
Exactly.
We just have LA and San Francisco, thank God.
Exactly. but that is
anything
it.
in between, child.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I think the larger problem that is happening nationally is that people think, you know, just because you have a supposed Democratic leader or you have a leader that looks like you, that you have it all figured out and that you're going to be okay. And I think what we're still learning is that the identity piece is only part of it. And it's really about thinking about identity and values together. Because we saw that also play out with the Supreme Court pick, right? Where it's like, yeah, you got a Black woman, but like, what else about this Black woman?
Right. What is the values?
I've met plenty
Are we aligned in our values?
I've met plenty of Black cis women who, you know, have called me a man.
Right, okay.
Or thought that I wasn't worthy of living, or who are homophobic, or, you know, whatever else, right? So we've got to get past this idea that the identity piece is enough, and then that's going to lead us to whatever salvation we're seeking. It's got to be more about the values.
Yeah, because Candace Owens is Black.
Yes.
That doesn't mean our values are aligned, is the point.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Right? Oh, that's right. Right.
I have a question. Hi, my name is Brianna, and first I have a statement. I just love it when you're raw and when you're unapologetic. We need to see more of that from you because I feel like that's what you're I would love to hear your perspective on media, influencers, companies, and orgs monetizing off of trans actions, movements, affectations. What do you feel about that?
What do I feel about that? Yeah. Okay. I was actually having this conversation with somebody yesterday about how interesting it is. And I implicate myself in this to an extent because social media was so big of a part of like my coming into my own voice like 5-6 years ago. I mean, I think really it was like Tumblr and then it was like Twitter. And those were places where I was having conversations about like what it was like to be a Black trans woman and my perspective on like politics and different things. And that was where a bulk of like my visibility started, was through social media. And it's interesting to see now, especially in like this post kind of Black Square era, where, I mean, and I roll my eyes too, y'all. Like I'm bombarded with like all of these like basic takes that are positioning themselves as like woke or progressive or whatever. I mean, there are so many folks who have become activist influencers and will look at the latest like news item and then put together their Instagram slides, and it's not really saying anything. And it's just drawing attention, or it's rehashing things that folks had been saying for years, or that some other creator, usually a creator of color or a queer and trans creator, already said, but they just didn't have the following. And that bothers me because there's been this kind of acceleration of like the commodification of like social justice. And it's difficult for me because I, in some ways, have been a part of that because I championed, you know, us having these kind of radical conversations on social media for years too. And so that it is hard. It is hard to see that. It is equally annoying to see every time we try to have these actions, and I'm working with Chase Strangio to try and figure out, you know, what our Trans Week of Visibility in Action will look like this year in the lead up to Trans Day of Visibility. But we see like all of these like posts that are like, follow and donate to the biggest organizations in the country. And you know that has always been a problem to me. Like that, you can say their names if you want to.
No, I can't. But
I mean, y'all, look.
Y'all know, just go to any LGBT Pride collection that...
Yes.
Yeah. Every June, every May and June, you know, big retailers. I mean, Pride is big money, which is what Brianna was highlighting too. Like LGBT Pride and, you know, child, if I see that rainbow one more time. But, you know, every company has their rainbow slippers, their rainbow clothes, their rainbow tings. And then the beneficiaries are always the same 3 white-led organizations.
White-led and mostly white serving organizations.
And then we're like, hi. And they're like,
and it's all a petition for the money, and that is what bothers me. That's why I've tried to always champion what is the grassroots organization that you're donating to. I mean, half of my like conversations with different companies or brands or even organizations is like, well, why is this group on the list? Oh, it's just because that they have that name recognition. It's not because you actually know what they do. There's a reason I can't tell you what they do. But I know what the district does. I know what Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative does. I know what House of Tulip in New Orleans does. I know what Black and Pink does. You know, I know that they are in the media and they have these like conversations, and you know, there may be some legislative fights that they are a part of, et cetera, et cetera. But you need to be funding and resourcing the groups on the ground. I mean, I made a thread about this on Twitter yesterday because I was just like aggravated, but a lot of these legislative fights, you know, say you win, say you don't win. What does that mean if you're still not giving any funding and resources to the community groups that are actually touching everyday trans people's lives? What does that mean? I mean, we have courts stacked against us. We have a lot of national politicians who don't really care about what's happening to us, or at least don't care enough to put energy into finding real solutions to keep us safe or protect us. So why don't we focus the energy on these local groups that are there when the trans youth are kicked out of their homes and are there when they're kicked out of their schools and don't have anywhere else to go? They're not going to those big national organizations in general to find housing, to find the health care that they need. Right. They're not going for those essentials because those organizations don't provide those essentials. So we need to be resourcing the ones who do.
Can I ask a question? I have a question.
Oh.
Okay. Given the emergence of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and several different legislatures being passed in Texas, at a point in time where I feel like the LGBT community, which is primarily led by cis gay men, is at such a divide, do you think that it's a time for a reshaping and a restructure and almost even holding those gay men accountable to stand up for the transgender community? And what do you think a radical-led action such as that would look like? Because I think we're way overdue for it.
Yeah, when I was at Out, I wrote this op-ed that was like, you know, pride is a disgrace to our ancestors right now. And one of the bullet points I had in it was, you know, we do need a radical reallocation of resources to grassroots-led, you know, groups. And I think what we have to understand is that these national organizations are just as capitalist as a company. You know, a lot of it, again, is about maintaining that hegemony. And, you know, a lot of these national CEOs and directors are making, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in their salary. And they're not even the ones that are doing the hardest work. I mean, I've talked to people at most of these organizations who are overworked, burned out, the only ones who actually hold real connection to community on the ground, who are actually, you know, figuring out ways to like do some of those essential things that are not prioritized, you know, on a top level. So I definitely think we need to be figuring out how we dismantle a lot of these organizations that are not actually putting their best foot forward to keep us safe and protect us. I mean, there was such a lot of them gave us like lip service once marriage equality was a thing, where it was like, oh, well, we'll come back for you. I mean, they've been saying they're going to come back for us since the 70s. Let's be very clear. Okay, we need to just go there. So And this is documented history. So the very first person who was ED of that largest LGBTQ plus national nonprofit in the 70s. He came up in a space where I believe it was actually in Minneapolis, where they were first piloting local ordinances to protect LGBTQ plus folks. But it was really just cis, gay, and lesbian folks really at that time. And there were groups who were saying that they wanted trans people to be recognized in that ordinance. This was in the 70s. And he actively pushed against it and demeaned the groups who, essentially as freaks or whatever, who were trying to fight for trans rights in the 70s. And the folks who were drag performers and like all of those folks. And so that is in the DNA of national LGBTQ plus lobbying, and it still exists today. That is why we are having these fights around trans rights, because they left us on the back burner for so long.
Or they cut
with
us out
no real
of the
intention to come back around.
Yep.
So I mean, it's in the DNA of it.
Well, Miss Raquel Willis, on behalf of the Transgender District, I want to thank you so much for being raw and authentic with us here at the Trans District. Thank you for flying here and opening our first in-person event of 2022.